हरि करना।
So now let's have a quick revision of probability basics. So let's begin with an experiment. An experiment is a process that produces an outcome or a set of outcomes. So let's take an example for an experiment. Tossing a coin is an experiment. So when it comes to the probability, we call this experiment as a random experiment because you are not sure about which outcome is gonna come out of your sample space. So let's take one example so that we can understand well. For example, tossing a coin is an experiment. So you know the outcomes of tossing a coin. Either it could be toss or head, but you are not sure which outcome is going to come. So when you toss a coin, when you flip a coin, it could be heads that come up or it could be tails that come up. So that's why it's called as a random experiment. In probability, we have only a random experiment. So when you toss a coin, what comes out is your outcome. So outcome an outcome is the result of a single trial of an experiment. An outcome is the single trial of an experiment. Example, in tossing a coin, the outcome can be either heads or tails. So when you toss up a coin, the tossing up a coin is your experiment, and what that comes out is your outcomes. So we can have a lot of outcomes, different types of outcomes. So we'll see the outcomes one by one. Okay, so the the basic one, so we call these outcomes as events. So let's begin with a simple events. A simple events are the individual outcomes of an experiment. So in tossing a coin, the simple events are heads and tails. So this is what we call it as a simple events. Again, I'll repeat. Experiment, tossing a coin is an experiment. Rolling a die is an experiment. So what comes out, what's the result of doing that experiment is your outcome. So there are different types of outcomes. We call them, particularly we call them as events. Out of them, the first one is simple events. Simple event is nothing but these are the individual outcomes of an experiment. So example, in tossing a coin, the simple events are heads and tails. So what we have next for us is compound events. Compound events are events that consists of two or more simple events. So example, in tossing two coins, the compound events are both coins land heads up, both coins land tails up, one coin lands heads up, and other lands tails up. So these are called compound events because the event consists of compound outcomes. The event consists of more than one outcome. So that's what we call it as a compound events. Example, HH, HT, or TT, or TH. So these are called as compound outcomes. Of course, these outcomes, when you have a multiple outcomes possibility, so that's called a compound events. So these are other two types of events. It could be simple event or compound event. So now we have equally likely events. So equally likely events are the events that have the same probability of occurring. So in tossing a fair coin, the events heads and tails are equally likely. And when you rolling a dice, the events or the simple events 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the probability of getting them is also same. So, and the next one we have is mutually exclusive events. So mutually exclusive events are events that cannot occur at the same time. So in tossing a single coin, the events heads and tails are mutually exclusive. In rolling a dice, in rolling a single dice, in rolling a single die, in rolling a single die, the simple events 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are mutually exclusive. And what we have next is exhaustive events. Exhaustive events are events that cover all possible outcomes of an experiment. So exhaustive events is nothing but these are the events that cover all possible outcomes of an experiment. Example again, in tossing a single coin, the exhaustive events are heads and tails. Similarly, in rolling a single dice, the exhaustive events are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then what we have here is independent events. So independent events are events where the outcome of one event does not affect the outcome of another event. So two coins, in tossing two coins, the first coin lands heads up and the second coin lands tails up are independent. Then we have dependent events. So dependent events are events where the outcomes of one event affects the outcomes of another event. So the best example for us here is drawing two cards from a deck without replacement. The probability of drawing a king on the second draw depends on whether a king was drawn on the first draw. So this is what the most important concepts of probability. So let's have a quick round of understanding about the probability basics. We'll begin with an experiment. Example, rolling a die or flipping a coin. So when you do some experiment, obviously you'll have a result. The result is your outcomes. So now these outcomes can be classified into different events based on the characteristics of the outcomes. If it is if you have done a single if you have rolled a single dice or single coin, so whatever outcome that comes in your sample space is called simple events. If you if you do if you flip a coin, if you flip two coins, or if you roll two dice, and whatever the outcomes that your sample space consists of your compound events. So similarly we have equally likely, which is equally likely events are the events that have the same probability of occurring. Mutually exclusive events are events that cannot occur at the same time, and exhaustive events are events that cover all possible outcomes of an experiment, and independent events are events where the outcome of one event does not affect the outcome of another event, and dependent events are the events where the outcome of one event affects the outcome of another event.